No.
Oh, really?
There is a famous discussion, you know, for in advanced Hanukkah learnings, because the basic story of Hanukkah is, people don't come to a class to learn the story of Hanukkah, although it's important to go over the basics every single year about where you put the menorah and what kind of oil to use and how high. A menorah should not be too low to the ground. It has to be at least 3 handbreadths off the ground, and it cannot be too high. It can be higher than 40 feet off the ground. Handbreadths is the average size of a human being's fist. So you can't put a menorah directly on the floor, right? So
it's like when you measure horses by hands.
So we don't light a menorah on the floor because the point of the menorah is it has to be visible it should be obvious, and too low people don't notice, and too high people don't notice. Okay, there's a famous the Bet Yosef was the author of the Shulchan Aruch, and he discusses an interesting question, which has been discussed by every important rabbi for the past 700 years probably has weighed in on this subject, but this has become one of the great discussions regarding one of the great historical rabbinic discussions regarding Hanukkah. The question that the Beis Yosef proposes is, why is it an 8-day festival, as you asked? If there was enough oil to last for one night, the miracle didn't become obvious until when? The second night. Because for one night they had enough oil. So he says, really, Hanukkah should be a 7-night holiday. It should be similar, and it should be a 7-branch menorah. We should only observe Hanukkah for 7 nights because even though the oil lasted 8 nights, the miracle of the oil lasting was only 7 nights, right? So why? Well, they had oil. They found oil.
Right.
So the first night was not a miracle. The second night was a miracle. Third night was a miracle. So why are we celebrating 8 nights? We should celebrate when the miracle actually begins. So this is a question there are many different answers to it. One of the answers that he proposes is that the finding of the oil itself was a miracle. That because the Greeks had made sure to contaminate and defile all the oil, and the fact that they found one jar and everything that was left, only one jar buried in the ground that they had overlooked. And he says he proposes that it's possible that there was no such thing. There was a miracle that God made this oil appear because they were searching and they really wanted to light the menorah, and to show the love and for their dedication, a jar of oil appeared.
Was it partly a miracle because it was a remnant from the high priest?
Certainly, I mean, we don't find also we don't find that the high priest used to seal oil. That wasn't part of his job. I mean, so it's odd that the high priest himself was the one that sealed this oil. So he's suggesting that itself was a miracle. The fact that they found this oil in the rubble. I mean, when they came back to the temple was in ruins. The Greeks, did a number on it, and the fact that they found this one thing of oil, that was already a miracle. So the first night was celebrating the finding of that jar of oil. But for a number of other reasons, they don't want to accept this premise that they would have decreed a festival day because of that. From the story, it seems that they established this miracle of 8 days after the 8 days of the menorah burning. So he proposes 3 novel ways of understanding the miracle. He writes that one opinion is that they knew that they only had enough oil for one night. The oil, the place that the oil came from was in the north of Israel. That's where all the olive groves were, in a city called Tekoa. That was the main area where oil was processed.
That's south of Jerusalem.
Huh?
Tekoa?
So there's
Tekoa?
Tekoa, Tekoa. So it's a Tekoa up in the north, in the tribe of Asher, up in the Galilee.
There's one just south of Jerusalem.
Okay, that's not the Tekoa where the oil was made. Asher was in the north of Israel, and he was blessed to have very good olives. But that was one of the blessings, that his territory would have very, very luscious olives, juicy olives, and the journey from Jerusalem to get the olives and to get them and come back, it was 3 days each way So it was not just south of Jerusalem. So actually, this Tekoa was all the way in the north of Israel. In those days, to get there, which was a 3-day journey, it would take a day to harvest and process it, and then to come back. And so they knew that it was going to be a week before they were going to get new oil for the round trip. So what they did was, what he says is that they took oil, they had a discussion. Should we put all the oil in and let it burn, so we'll have the menorah for one night, but then we have no menorah for a week until the new oil comes? Or they said, we're going to divide the little oil that we have into 8 little measures, because we know that it's going to take 8 days until the new oil comes in. So rather than have the menorah lit a whole night for one night and nothing for a week, let's light the menorah each night for an hour, right? 45 minutes. So they took that one jar of oil and divided it into 8 parts. And the miracle is that oil that would normally only burn for an hour, it burnt the entire night. So the idea is that even the first night there was a miracle. Another suggestion is that they poured all the oil in the first night, but when they came back the next morning, only an 1/8 burnt. So, however you want to slice the thing, he says that the miracle was obvious the first night too, that in the quality and the quantity of the oil changed even the first night of Chanukah.
That the flame went out?
No, so when they came back the next morning, the oil the oil that should have burnt out through the night, only an 1/8 burned.
It was not lit anymore.
It was lit, but it was
Oh, I
lit.
see.
But oil, it was burning at a much slower pace. So the nature of oil changed, that it was burning the quality became so miraculous that it was burning, but nothing was burning off of it.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
So it isn't just the fact that the miracle actually took place the second night, but that it was a miracle that was extended over 8 nights.
Correct.
Really? Okay. So that's why it's not 2 nights versus 8 nights, because Hanukkah could only be 2 nights, because the miracle actually took place on the second night.
Well, it took place every single night until new oil came. What happened was, after 8 nights, right, when new oil came in, the miracle ended. There was no need for a miracle anymore, and all of a sudden the oil went back to becoming regular oil, and from then on, oil burnt only for one night. That measurement of oil only burnt for one night. So the miracle, every single night there was a miracle going on, because either an 1/8 of an oil burnt for a whole night, or only an 1/8 of an oil went down in the cup.
But back
He had a third one. He had a third one where they poured oil from the jug into the cup, and there was still oil left in the jug. So there are 3 ways. He says that there are 3 ways of understanding that the miracle happened the first night too, because it was obvious to everyone there that first night that something miraculous was happening, not only becoming obvious in day number 2.
But back then when it happened, what did they say then about why they thought it had happened?
What did they say?
Yeah, what did they think was?
They realized, they knew there was a miracle happening. It was obvious to everybody
That
that
God had intervened.
correct. But you see that the irony is that what many of the commentaries ask as well is that there's no such, under normal conditions, we light the menorah with that kind of oil. But there's a halacha that when you don't have any other oil, you can use oil. You can even use contaminated oil. So, and there was plenty of that oil around. So, halachically, they would have been able to use contaminated oil because they had no other oil to use. But they didn't want to. They said, we fought so hard to get this temple back, to get the Greeks out. We're not going to use subpar oil. And in other words, an essential quality of Hanukkah is that the miracle never would have happened had the Jews not been so obstinate, in the sense they forced the hand of God, they forced the miracle. Because there was other oil to use, but they wouldn't use it. They would only use this one jar of oil. They said, if we don't have it, we're not going to use anything. We're not going to use oil that the Greeks contaminated, even though halakhically we can use it. The rule is in Jewish law that if more than a majority of the Jewish people are all ritually impure, then everything can be done in a state of impurity. And at that time, most of the Jewish people, the majority of the Jewish people were impure because they were all fighting, they were all in battle, and they were all in combat. They had all been in contact with dead bodies. And so, not only the menorah, all the service of the temple would have been able to be done in a state of virtual impurity because that was the status of the majority of the Jewish people. But they didn't want to. They felt like that this is not what we fought for. We fought the Greeks because they were imposing their will against us all this time, and we're going to sacrifice to have our way of life. And so, had they used other oil, the menorah probably would have burnt naturally. No menorah, no miracle, no Chanukah. So Chanukah is a result of people just saying that we're going to only do it the optimum way. As I started from the beginning of the class, it seems that this is the tradition why everybody adopted to light the menorah the way they light the menorah in the most optimum way. Because since the miracle only happened because they would not do a lesser form of a mitzvah, even though it would have been valid, we could celebrate Hanukkah with lighting only one candle. That would be fine. But that would be the minimum. But Hanukkah only happened because the Jews would not settle for the minimum. They said, we're only going to do it and use this oil. And if we don't have this oil, we're not using any oil, no menorah lighting. We don't care. We don't want to use, contaminated oil for our menorah.
But that makes sense given the story, doesn't it? Because they were celebrating the fact that they got the temple back.
Correct.
So you only want to act properly towards the temple.
True, but Jewish law says that it's not improper to use that oil, and in that scenario, they were stuck. It takes a week it takes 8 days to get new oil to come in, and in the meantime, you have other oil. So if you were at that time, you said, well, we can have the menorah lit with regular oil, or we don't like the menorah at all because we don't have the best oil, right? Let's say you have extra virgin olive oil. That's what you want to use. But you know what? You don't have extra virgin olive oil. You have regular olive oil. So you can say, well, I'm not going to bake because I don't have extra virgin oil. I'm going to go hungry.
But weren't they kind of trying to make a distinction between the desecration from the other army versus
I agree.
acting the way you should?
For sure. That's what they were trying to do. There's actually a more mystical, Kabbalistic component to this.
Okay.
The reason why the whole thing revolves around oil is because oil symbolizes the one liquid that does not mix with other liquids. All liquids, when you mix them, they merge. If you pour oil into any other liquid, it always floats to the top. Oil has this obstinate characteristic that it won't mix with other liquids. Oil represents this idea that what did the Greeks want? The Greeks wanted the Jewish people to assimilate and become like everybody else, to become Hellenized, and to leave go of their antiquated ideas and their belief that we are separate. This has been the complaint against the Jewish people, that we are stubborn, but we always keep to ourselves. You know the story of Purim in the Megillah when Haman comes to Achashverosh. What does he say? He says there's one stubborn nation that they have their own laws. They keep to themselves. They're separate. They're separate from everybody else. They're spread out all over. They live everywhere, but they live apart. That has been the attack when Balaam curses the Jewish people in the desert. When he wants to curse them and he blesses them, he recognizes their uniqueness is that he says, "Behold, they are a nation that dwells alone." Right? So it's a blessing and a curse in the sense that we live amongst everyone,